Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Emma Tuttle. Today we are going to talk about shooting in manual, focusing on aperture. So first, let's talk about a little bit of the mechanics of aperture. So you have this cool rifling ring closing thing inside of your camera, and it's the thing that in James Bond when he's looking through a telescope and he's looking through a thing and they're tracking James Bond, you see this thing that's closing in. I'm not really good at explaining it, but basically that is the function happening inside of your camera that is controlling your aperture. And how wide that is, how open that is, or how closed that is will determine how blurry or not blurry your background is. Before we get into that, let me explain. A low aperture is probably somewhere around f1.8, f2.0, f3.2. When I say high aperture, I'm referring to f8.0, f16, f22. Now, a low aperture is going to give you that really nice blurry background. So you're going to focus on your subject and the background is going to be really smooth. Now, not every lens allows you to shoot a super low aperture, which is kind of a part of the learning curve when you're buying gear. But if your lens does allow you to, it's so nice to have. Now, a funny thing about aperture is that if you are shooting at a narrower focal length, so if it's at 200 millimeters, you're going to have a blurrier background just naturally with or without a higher or lower aperture. But if you're shooting super wide at 16 millimeters like this is, you're going to struggle to find that blurry background. So focal length does kind of have an effect on that, but we're not really going to get into that right now. Mostly, low aperture equals blurry background. It also means that you get more light. And so if you are a natural light photographer and you don't want to use your flash, you don't want to get it out, having a low aperture is your best friend. And when I first got started in photography, I was like, this is the stuff, because I get a blurry background, I can shoot in darkness, hooray. But there are limitations. And you'll quickly find that that is not adequate for all photography situations, but that's okay. So when it comes to a higher aperture, so we're talking f8.0, f22, we're going to be letting in less light by raising our aperture. So you're going to have to adjust your settings appropriately, be it with your ISO or shutter speed, to let in the appropriate amount of light to get the exposure that you want. Also, more of your frame overall is going to be in focus. And sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. You're going to want that the most probably with your realty, your landscape photography, that sort of thing, astrophotography, whatever it may be. You might also hear people referring to a shallow depth of field or a wide depth of field. Depth of field just means how much of the image you can see. So our eyeballs, when we look around a room, we have a very wide depth of field. We can see everything in our viewpoint. Things aren't normally blurry. Unless you put something really close to your face like this, then your hand is in focus and everything else behind it is out of focus and blurry. So that would be a very shallow depth of field. But for the most part, a wide depth of field means you can see everything really well. Shallow depth of field means you can see one thing super well, but everything behind it, the depth and what you're looking at, is blurrier and harder to see. So personally, I've found finding the right aperture to shoot with portrait photography has been kind of difficult. When I first got started, I would shoot wide open all the time, meaning I would shoot at the lowest aperture possible because I wanted that blurry background so bad. But then it came to light that I was losing detail, that there would be points in a photo where actually maybe I want both eyeballs on someone's face to be in focus, or I'm missing my focus because I'm shooting at such a shallow depth of field that I get the tip of their nose in focus but not their eyes. And so I've lost some photos that would have been great had I nailed the focus better. Now, if I personally could give you a sweet spot for a portrait session, 2.8 is really a great place to hang out. You're going to get a lot of detail in your photo. You can photograph a couple people at the same time, and if they're at different depths in your image, they're not going to be totally off. But they do say the higher amount of people you have in a photo, the higher your aperture should be, because you're going to have people at different depths and things, and it just helps to make sure that everyone is in focus and you can see everyone's faces. So let's talk about the case for a super wide aperture. Mostly it's artistry. You want it to be pretty, you want the yummy fall off to be happening, and you don't really care too much about having everything in your photo in focus. I think it's great when the occasion calls for it. I think it's beautiful. So go for it when you want to. Personally, I would not do it all the time. I would not recommend that. But if it's what you do, well, go for it. And if you start to notice you don't like it, then you can pivot. It's fine. The other case for a super wide aperture is you just want the most bokeh you can possibly get. You want all of the yummy blurry backgroundness for whatever reason. Maybe you're shooting someone really close up. You have a not super long lens, which means you don't have a lot of compression. You're not going to get a lot of background blur, and you want to make the Christmas tree lights in the background look really blurry. Well, that is a good time to use that lower aperture. So when it comes to shooting at a higher aperture, you're going to want that for your realty, interior design, landscape photography, because you're going to want everything to be in focus. Now look, there is no rule here. No one says you have to do one thing or another, but there are guidelines to follow that will give you kind of a standard look. I think it's just like the artistry of it and figuring out how you want your images to look. When you get started, I think you want to look like everyone else while still have kind of your own thing going on. But eventually you have to decide like what I want to give my clients, what I want to create, and the more you understand that, the more you can be in control of the final product you're giving people. So guys, that's the cool girl, that's Aperture. There's really not a ton to say about her, except that she's awesome and she makes things pretty and blurry. And also, I just feel like Aperture is one thing that highly determines the look of your image in a way that like shutter speed and ISO don't so much. So it's just something to be mindful of. And also it's probably one of those settings that I think about the most because it can so intensely impact the way that your image looks. So anyway, guys, if you have questions about this, please feel free to comment as always. If you like my channel, like, subscribe. Tell me what you liked or didn't like about this video. And just thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have an awesome day.